So good evening. Call to order the Capital Improvements and Street Maintenance Committee for Thursday, June 4th. I'm going to open up the meeting today, so this is the first meeting that we've had since the new council's come on, so we'll be selecting a chair and vice chair, and then I will turn it over to the chair. Item 1 on the agenda is select a chairman and vice chairman for the 2020-2022 term. At this time, I would ask for any nominations. Yeah, go ahead, Deb.
I would like to nominate for chair Lisa Rasmussen.
Is there a second? Second by Jim. Lisa, would you willing to accept that?
I would be willing. I've done it before.
Okay. Any other nominations? Once again, any other nominations? With no other nominations, do we need to vote or by
You
consensus?
just cast a unanimous ballot if there's no other nominations.
Okay. Seems like that's a unanimous ballot then, or you want to call? Okay. So Lisa Rasmussen will be the chairman for the 2022 term.
Okay. Do you want me to accept the nominations for the vice chair?
Sure, that'd be
Turn it
great,
over?
Lisa.
Okay.
Yep.
I'm going to
Thank
stay in
you.
this chair because we are already
Okay.
well distanced and I can,
Right.
none of our committee members are called in on WebEx. So with that, I'll accept nominations for the vice chair for this current term. Ms. Ryan?
I'd like to nominate Lou Larson.
Okay. We have one nomination for Lou Larson for vice chair. Is there any other, is there any other nomination?
I would nominate Jim Wadinsky.
Okay. Any other nominations? Okay. I have to remember, do we voice vote these? I think. Or do we, yeah, that's right, or we secret ballot them, I think.
Yes, we do.
Okay. So we'll need we'll need to circulate some ballots out. Sticky notes are fine, and we'll, indicate your choice on your secret ballot. We'll show 2 nominations, so. Okay, so on your secret ballot, either mark your ballot for Lou Larson or Jim Wadinsky, and then Eric will come around and grab them.
Thank you. You want to open them?
Oh, you can open them. May as well share the fun.
I have 3 for Jim Wadinsky and 2 for Lou Larson.
Okay, so then we'll recognize that by a committee vote, Jim Wadinsky has been appointed as the vice chairman for the CISM committee. Congratulations, Jim. All right. That brings us to establish a regular meeting date and time for this term. This committee traditionally has always met at 5:30 on the second Thursday of each month. Obviously, we have special meetings as necessary, but that enables us to get our items, most of our items, onto the first agenda for the following month for council. And that we also then can expedite items if we have to get them to that second meeting of the month if we would need to, but that date and time has served us well. Also for people who are working, 5:30 seemed to be a reasonable time. Does anybody wish to change that meeting time, or are you guys good with 5:30 on the second Thursday?
From a staff perspective, does 5:30 is 5? Would 5, be okay with?
We can go 5:15.
Okay.
I don't know if 15 minutes makes a difference. I work till 5, but
Okay.
I don't know if 15 minutes makes much of a difference, so. You guys prefer 5:15? Because it's fine by me if that's what you want to do.
Okay.
Good with that?
I guess
Fine
we're-
by me.
Yeah.
Okay, all right, so we'll agree by
Thank you.
consensus that we'll adjust the meeting time for CISM then to 5:15 on the second Thursday of each month. The next item on our agenda is to approve the minutes of the April 9th, 2020 meeting. Minutes are in the packets. Any adjustments or corrections to the minutes necessary? If not, is there, oh, go ahead, Deb.
Since I did not attend those meetings, I will abstain on this vote.
Okay. All right,
I will as well,
okay.
abstain.
I was going to say, I hope that all three of you don't abstain, because then we can't pass them. We have three new members on the committee, which normally doesn't happen.
Madam Chair,
Yes.
I would just suggest that, from your perspective, if you give us your feeling on the accuracy of those
The-
minutes. I mean, having breezed through them, and
Yep.
they seem to be in English and comprehensive, but if there's anything
They are.
wrong, let us know.
Nope, when I read them, they seem to accurately depict everything that took place in the meeting, and they match the video record. So with that, I'd accept a motion to approve those
I'd
minutes.
move to approve.
Motion by Neal, is there a second?
Second.
Second by Wadinsky. Members in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? And we'll record 2 abstentions. So those minutes will pass with 3 members voting in favor and 2 abstentions. Item number 4 is discussion and possible action on an easement to WPS for burying electrical service across city-owned property at 110 East Thomas Street. Let me toggle between the packet and the agenda, and who has this item? Does Alan have this item, or Eric have this item?
I've been.
Okay, you want to walk us through that one then, and?
Sure. So as many of you have probably seen, TDS is in the city right now, putting in fiber optic. I think they have 10 or 12 crews in right now, and going to ramp up to 16 crews. Last year, they put a main line in, and they have easements, like one outside of City Hall in the park, and throughout the city, and one is at 110 East Thomas Street. Typically, they would bring power from the street, but in this case, power is actually back at the alley, and so we own that piece at 110 East Thomas Street, so they're gonna come down and bury that line on the far west side of that property line, so TDS will have power at their box, which is on the southwest corner of that property, near the sidewalk.
Okay. It's a pretty standard easement agreement in the packet as well. Anyone have questions for Eric on that item?
I would like to speak on the
Go
item,
ahead, Lou.
please.
Yep.
I don't know if realize there's been a lot of digging and stuff that has gone on through that area already, but the digging that has been done, there hasn't been any soil testing done in there, and I certainly, you're digging right up alongside of a brown field there, and for the sake of the safety of the neighborhood and the people working, I would just as soon have that soil tested and remediated if need be, before any further digging is to be done there. I mean, you're probably going to end up testing it anyway when you're looking at putting residential or whatever, your development, it goes there. So I will not, I'm going to oppose any digging at this time until any further testing is done.
One
Thank
thing
you.
we were able to do on an easement, maybe this is just a suggestion, I don't know if it's possible, but one thing we were able to do near 1300 Cleveland, where we had similar concerns, was rather than trench that item in, we were able to bore it in so that you weren't upsetting and moving soil and opening it up and exposing it. They drilled it in from underneath, and then the soil wasn't disrupted. Is that an option on this one, that we could bore that in for them?
Yeah, I'm sure it is with them. I haven't approached them with that, but I could certainly can and tell them that would be the
Because
stipulation of the
that did work
easement.
on Cleveland, and then they
Yep.
didn't bring up any dirt at all. Would that
Right.
would that be amenable, Lou? If they could trench it, or if they could bore it in?
Yes, I would go with that, yes. I hear, you hear a lot of that on the radio and stuff, that Steve's Plumbing and stuff does a lot of that
Sure.
boring and stuff there. I would go with that,
So then
yes.
what I would
Okay.
do then is I would accept a motion to approve the easement with the stipulation that the access be bored in and not dug. Would someone make that motion?
I would move to approve that, as stated.
Okay, we have a motion from Neil. Is there a second? Second from Ryan. Further discussion or questions? Seeing none, then members in favor signify by saying aye. Opposed? None are opposed, that motion carries. Item number 5 is discussion and possible action on temporary parking changes in the area commonly known as the River District for an expressly limited time period to assist the reopening of businesses during the COVID-19 pandemic, including adding 2 15-minute parking stalls in the 300 block of North 3rd Street adjacent to the existing 15-minute stall located at mid-block. Item B is eliminating the 15-minute stall on the north end of the 300 block of 3rd Street. And item C is closing 2 to 3 parking stalls located in front of the restaurants along the 300 to 600 block of North 3rd Street to allow increased outdoor food and alcohol service and seating options in those blocks of North 3rd Street. In the packets, you've got some information. This actually kind of filtered through from Public Health and Safety. You'll recall at the last council meeting, we passed a bunch of changes that would be active between now and October 31st to help restaurants increase their capacity to have people dine outside. That same group asked us to make some temporary modifications to the parking downtown to allow for easy in and easy out for curbside pickup food orders, so that people can park, get their food, and depart, and that those, at least during the summer months, that those stalls would cycle out more quickly. With that, we also approved a Wednesday night event where we would allow the street to be closed, and then those parking stalls, they would be able to put tables in for a 4-hour period and let people dine on the sidewalk and in the street to keep them separated and keep that distancing active. So all of those things, since 3 of them involve parking, are here. I don't know if, Tara crafted this for us, so if we have any questions about the language as far as the term or what we're actually amending, we can work with her. And I think Eric and Cord have looked at it as well. Do you guys have questions for anyone on that item? Why don't we take them one at a time, just because there's 3 specific changes. So the 15-minute parking stalls, if I remember correctly, is the curbside takeout parking spaces that they were asking for. Do we have a motion to approve those? Motion by Ryan, is there a second? Second by Neil. Further discussion or questions? Seeing none, members in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? None are opposed, so that motion carries. The second item is eliminating the 15-minute parking stall on the north end of the 300 block of 3rd Street. And I think because we added the other stalls and compacted them together, that this one, they're giving up temporarily. So all of these things sunset on 10/31, but for the summer, they would be in effect. And then DPW would re-sign them accordingly for the summer. Do we have a motion to approve that one? Motion by Ryan, is there a second? Second by Larson. Further discussion or questions? Seeing none, members in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? None are opposed, that motion carries. And item C is closing 2 to 3 parking stalls located in front of restaurants along the 300 to 600 blocks of North 3rd Street to allow increased outdoor food and alcohol service and seating options on the 300 to 600 blocks of North 3rd Street. Now, the way this agenda item is worded, I'm looking for clarification on this one, though. Is this strictly for the Wednesday night event, or are they looking for this full-time? Because I didn't remember hearing them ask for it
I worded
full-time.
it generally because no one really knew exactly what everybody wanted. So
Right.
my opinion would be it would just be for the special events.
Right, they seem to only want it for Wednesday night, because they also want places for their customers to park the rest of the time. So they don't want us to restrict parking and take those stalls away unless the event is happening, which only happens once a week. So I think with our motion, we should stipulate that this item C is approved for the proposed Wednesday night event only.
I would also, the way it was worded when Mark Craig asked for it, he said 2 to 3 stalls. What I would probably do is word it so that 2 to 3 stalls, depending on what's appropriate, given the front area of the,
Right. Given the fact that during that event, we're closing the entire street to traffic, I think it would make sense that we would close, or at least close, all of the parking stalls, because if you can't drive down there, no one's going to park there. And then they can utilize all of the parking stalls for tables, and the travel lane where the cars normally would drive is going to be the access lane for people either coming in on foot or for emergency vehicles, just so that people aren't walking in amongst the tables when people are trying to eat, because we thought people would be more comfortable if they were kind of off to the side with their table, and the foot traffic was not near them. So,
They'll still have to limit their alcohol service to that amended premise, but it leaves
Right.
it flexible. And what we do in CISM is you have the authority to make temporary parking regulations. So this would not go to council. What I've started doing, that occurred when we merged parking and traffic and this committee. So what I did when Alderman Gisselman was here is I would just prepare a resolution of this committee, and then the chair would just sign that, and since it's temporary, if it was not temporary, then it would obviously have to go to
right,
council.
we did that same thing with the valet parking trial for the downtown businesses when they were working on that. So, all right, so I would accept a motion then, under item C to close all of the parking stalls between the 300 and 600 block of 3rd Street during the Wednesday night dine-out event between now and October 31st. I think that's what they were going for in their ask. And did we determine, did the 5 and 600 block businesses also want to participate? The original ask was for the 300 and 400 block only, but we were going to check with Blake, and he was going to check with La Prima back when in Downtown Grocery and find out if they were interested.
No one has ever said.
Okay. So the mayor's going to try and make contact with Blake before we vote here, see if he answers.
Well, the other thing, you know, you can do it is, you know, leave it for that whole area if the other restaurants participate.
That's true. So our motion could designate it for the 300 and 400 block, and including the 500 and 600 block, should those businesses opt to participate. So we would leave that contingent upon their participation. If they're not part of the Wednesday night event, their parking stalls are unaffected. You could kind of set it up that way. Would that work?
Yeah, we kind of set up the plan to how to block those blocks off too if needed.
Okay.
I haven't heard from Mark or.
Right. They only did
downtown
ask
either.
for the two, but
Yep.
knowing that's where they were the key stakeholder. But we decided maybe the entire River District would like to be included. They're all in the same boat for losing customer base and needing to spread people out. Some of them do, though, have their own sidewalk cafe permits and outdoor dining already. Back when has a very large outdoor dining area, so maybe they have decided not to, I don't know. But he hasn't answered yet?
Would the non-restaurant facilities be able to use that spot in front of their business?
Not during the Wednesday night event. So if we close the 500 and 600 block, which really there are only those 3 food businesses down there, those other businesses often are not open after 5, and this event is from 4 to 9.
Oh, you're right.
So likely they're closed anyway. Some of them may choose to have evening hours. If people are coming downtown, maybe they'd want to be open, but a lot of them do close early. So,
And
Ms.
Madam
Ryan.
Chair, the northern, exit, if you will, of each block would remain open if they're, where people parked,
Yes, and the
beyond
cross
the time. They
streets are
can
all
leave, but you just can't come in.
Yep, and the cross streets are all open. So Jefferson, Scott, and Grant are all open. So it's just 3rd. Ms. Ryan?
Lisa, I had some concerns about the actual parking area. It just seems that, is there a way that that can be roped off for each of the restaurants so that we know where they're located, so that it's just not open for people to come through? If there's a certain restaurant that's designated certain stalls, and as a way to kind of have, almost a square, and having some rope or some type of pole or something to delineate between which restaurants, so that people aren't necessarily just coming in and
When
doing
we-
things, or walking through that area.
Yep. I think the premises license might take care of that, because when Public Health and Safety did the premises license amendment to allow them to have the alcohol out there, they delineate which area that includes. And so those restaurants also, I believe, intend to mark their tables with their own signage, so people know that they're in Lemongrass's area, or Chow's area, or El Jalapeno's area, or whatever. So I think that the restaurants intend to take care of that, so they have their own little identity in there where those tables are still spread out. So I think people will know when they've entered one restaurant's area and another's. just because they have to control that with their licensed server. And the license has to show where that perimeter starts and stops. They have to draw it out on a map. So I think that even if we don't manage that here, they will.
Good, that's a
So-
good point, thank you.
Okay.
So,
Oh, go ahead, Mayor.
They haven't heard back. Blake hasn't heard back yet from either of those establishments, but he's following back up with them on Monday. He said they got pushed back because of the demonstration concerns, so.
Okay, let's make that contingent then upon. So that way, our end of it is done, and if they want it, then DPW can work with them to cordon off extra. So then appropriately, our motion would be to close the parking stalls in the 300 and 400 block of 3rd Street during the Wednesday night dine-out event, and include the 500 and 600 block of 3rd Street only if the restaurants in those 2 blocks wish to participate. If they don't, those parking stalls would all remain open. Do we have such a motion?
I'll make such a motion.
Okay, we have a motion by Larson. Is there a second?
Second?
Second by Neal.
One thing
ahead.
to bear in mind, let's just say in the case of the 600 block, there's a potential for one business saying, I want that, and the one across the street saying, I don't want that, and how do we deal with a conflict like that? Not saying it would happen, but it could.
Right. Normally, they work together very well. I'm willing to roll the dice on that because they all have been a very unified front working with Main Street together. So if they're not, I think we'd have to manage that in the committee. But this is really only in effect from, because we'll send it to council with a suspension of the rules because it's so close. But we want council to approve it on June 9th so they can start using it at the end of that week and then use it through Halloween. And then it goes away. But we wanted to get them the help as soon as we could and then let them run it all summer. So, okay, so with the motion, if there is a problem though between businesses as far as one wanting it and one not, we certainly would manage that here and I'm sure that the staff would let us know.
Okay.
So, all right, with a motion and a second on the floor then, to close the parking spots as we mentioned before. Any further discussion or questions? Seeing none then, members in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? None are opposed, that motion carries. The last item of business on our agenda tonight then is discussion and possible action on the proposed 2021 street projects and 5-year plan. And we've got our city engineer, Alan, with us on that. And in the packet, I'm sure that we all saw many of us have seen it before, our long list of street projects that someday need to float to the top to the tune of nearly $90 million. So we only take a few at a time. We only have money for a few each year. But that list never ceases to amaze. So welcome, Alan.
So hopefully you've all read the staff report. There's a couple items we kind of like to walk through, or I'd like to walk through, and Eric and I know Mary Ann's here to talk a little bit about it too. So the first thing we do is we put together a 5-year plan. Was the first reference here, and it tries to identify the streets that we'd like to reconstruct over the next 5 years. And a lot of questions arise as to kind of where that comes from. And for the 2021 proposed Eau Claire Boulevard, Emerson, Mount View, and Pied Piper, those were actually proposed last year, or to be constructed this summer. During the budget process, those were pushed to 2021. So that's kind of how they rose to the top of this year's. So then we put the numbers to that. When we put the estimates together for Eau Claire and those 3 small blocks, it pretty much eats up the entire budget for the street reconstruction as what we've typically budgeted. I shouldn't say typically, what's been the last couple of years anyway. As you can see, I have the other streets listed on the bottom. Now, how these arrive is in engineering, we ride the streets. Every 2 years, we're required to rate every block of the street in the city of Wausau. So that happened last fall. We re-rated all the streets, and obviously every 2 years they get a little bit worse. So then more streets get added. Now the ratings go from 1 to 10. So when we rate every block between a 1 and a 10, and it's kind of a scale that the DOT puts out on it's called a Whistler rating. So every street you're seeing on the streets, 10 being a brand new street, 1 being gravel, kind of. So that's kind of the way the ratings go. 1, like I say, is a gravel road. So anything below a 4 is considered for reconstruction. So every street you see on here in every segment is a 4 or lower as a rating. And then there are a few other streets that are rated lower than a 4 that are not on this list because I'm considering those for asphalt overlay. So all these streets that are on here could be reconstructed, which is obviously a massive list. I came up with costs for all these just based on average, what we've been paying per block. Now, this isn't an exact science because some of the streets are narrower, some are wider, but this is just on average what these blocks would cost. And when I added all those up, I came to a total of $90 million worth of streets that need to be reconstructed in the city, which has grown, obviously, So, and I get requests to reconstruct streets all the time. I know some of you members have asked, why aren't we doing this street or why aren't we doing that street? And to be honest with you, you could literally throw a dart in any section of the city and hit a street that needs to be reconstructed. So there's no magic to some of these streets. Now this year there was a need to do Cedar Street's being done on the west side of town from 6th to 12th, and that was really that one rose to the top. Just to give you an example, in those 6 blocks there was I think 27 water main breaks recorded. So that's how that one rose to the top. It was rated like a 3 plus all the water main breaks. It was like a quilt, and they just continued to break and cause residents issues. So that's how that one rose to the top. Eau Claire Boulevard does have old utilities, old sewer and water main breaks, and it's rated between 3s and 4s, and along with the 3 blocks, Emerson, Mount View, and Pied Piper. So they all meet those they met the qualifications 2 years ago when we considered looking at it. So if anybody has questions on the 5-year plan or streets that are on or not on there.
I do have a question.
Okay, Mr. Neal, and then Lou.
Oh, sorry, Mr.
Go ahead,
Mr.
Tom.
Larson. I'm not that familiar with that part of town. I make it over there maybe once a year, so I can't really, in my mind's eye, picture, adjacency of these streets. But, since they all seem to be kind of clustered, is this, 2 questions, probably like an expediency to have everything, together, or because of interconnectedness or something, doing them all together? And is there any possibility here, though, of neighbors, residents being kind of locked out due to construction?
Eau Claire is, it obviously goes from Grand all the way to the west termini, so it's a long stretch. These 3 blocks, Emerson, Mount View, and Pied Piper, lie between, they're one block, they lay between Eau Claire and Kent. Kent was rebuilt 3 years ago. So what this does, it ties those 1 block segments between 2 new constructions. So the thinking is that Emerson, Mount View, and Pied Piper are all in need of reconstruction. So instead of coming through at a later date and reconstructing through something we've already constructed, we'll construct those 1 little blocks. So, because if we didn't, and you went through and you redid Eau Claire Boulevard, then when you come through and try and do Pied Piper, you'd be digging through a brand new street. So my thinking is to get those 1 block segments between 2 new streets, so we can. It's trying to save money, and it's trying to do them in a fashion where we don't have to dig into them again later.
Well, that, and I think logistically it makes sense that the neighborhood is really, I guess, inconvenienced when this is all happening, even though it's not, months and months and months. If you get in, get them fixed up, and then get out and don't come back 2 or 3 years in a row, I think that most neighborhoods appreciate that. They have one rough summer, and then it's over for a really long time. And so, I think that I've heard from neighborhoods that say, if we can cluster this stuff together. Now, when we deferred this project last year, I did hear, I think we even had some people visit us in the committee when we deferred these projects from the southeast side, saying that those streets were in rough shape, and they were hopeful we would not defer them, but that if we did, they hoped that this year we would not then defer them a second time, because some of them were in pretty rough shape, and people who live down there have been waiting quite a while to have those done. So if only we could have seen the future, it certainly would have made sense to be doing them this summer when there's no balloon rally. But we don't have that luxury. So, that said, I know that there was support in the neighborhood for these projects to finally get done. That neighborhood understands that it needs to be done, and they were certainly not opposed to it. Some neighborhoods, if you would build a cluster like this, and these homeowners then are obviously assessed for their portion of things, some neighborhoods will come in and ask to be put off if they're in an area where they either don't have block grant funds to assist with it, or people just can't afford it, they'll ask us to hold off sometimes, but that wasn't the case with these. So, did you want to walk through the other years, Alan, or do you want us to just work on, or is this an informational item,
yeah.
or do you need us to
No,
approve this plan?
I think Lou had a question too.
Oh, go ahead, Lou, sorry.
Obviously, I don't envy your job because it's quite apparent that you drive all over Wausau. There's priorities all over. But my concern is, as I mentioned with Eric, I've had Eric, is 2024 Rosecrans Street from 17th to 22nd Avenue. That road is beyond repair, and that not only it's a bus route too. And delivery vehicles go up and down that street to get to the corporate cove and stuff. And at any given time, a bicyclist or anybody can wipe out a motorcyclist on a pothole or anything in that street. And I was just wondering if there's any kind of overlay or Band-Aid effect you could do to that street until it gets to its 2024 repair date, or if you could move it up. And one other street that is in my district too is, I believe it's 20th Avenue that Eric and I also walked on, and that street it's nothing but crumbled. I mean, and it rains, it snow melts, the whole thing's underwater. There's no drainage there. Basically, that whole neighborhood there's no drainage there, and water just sits in the streets. My own house, where I live on 21st Place, I have water that does not drain from the street. And being a senior citizen, I have concerns about slipping on ice, because I have a lake at the end of my driveway, whenever it freezes. But, so I was just wondering if these concerns could be looked at and be pushed up, and thank you.
Yeah, it's going to, it really is up to this committee how they want to move ahead and move priorities up, so.
Pardon me, I would be happy to take any of, or all of the committee down Rosecrans Street and show them exactly what I mean. Thank you.
It has been on the list, I would agree. There's a lot of
Yes.
streets on, no.
I have a question.
Sure.
What is the option? I mean, I know that we can do overlay, and then obviously residents that are not charged for overlay, but we can only do so much of that. But is there an option, rather than a complete overlay, to buy us a few years to do skin patch, which is what we did to Thomas Street, waiting? We bought ourselves an extra 3 or 4 years, while Thomas Street was in limbo, by putting a skin patch on, and that just, it smoothed it out enough that you could drive on it and plow it without a whole lot of issues. And, it's not designed to last 10 or 15 years, but is that an option for us on any of this?
I think Eric and I have been looking at that. I think the DPW, I think, just is in the process of buying a little bigger and a little better paver. And I think we're going to look at least Eric is going to look at getting some more funds to do just that. The thinking has been in the past, you don't want to overlay a street that has water main. A lot of the water main in Wausau is 1920, 1940, early stuff. So we, had issues overlaying water main that was that early of a vintage, doing a full overlay and spending a good amount of money. But I think our streets are to a point now where we can't wait on a lot of these streets to put money into them. We're going to have to do some thinner overlays or some skin patching just to try and get them through, because I know there's several streets. One that comes to mind is Jackson Street, but from Bellis to the tracks, you can't even drive on it. And the amount of time DPW spends patching, we're going to have to do some of that work.
Right.
on
I've been
some of
And
the
that is
streets.
exactly how Rosecrans Street is. You
Right.
can't even drive on it.
So I think we're going to have to look at getting some money into the DPW budget, some more hot mix money to get some temporary skin patches to get some of these streets through.
Because I've been asked for that on North Third from Randolph to Boss Creek. And you can see how much patchwork they've done when you go out there. It looks like a quilt. It's exactly how it is. And so where they haven't cut it for water mains, they've been trying to cut it out and patch potholes with a patch that's not just the cold mix that pops right back out. So, I mean, you can see it all over town. And if we have that ability, one thing that I will say from this committee is we do our best to pick as many streets as we know we can afford, but we also, by the time the budget gets completed and gets all the way through finance and council, sometimes when we come up and we are $8 million short, the first thing that we look at to cut is infrastructure. Why? Because it's expensive. And so the cumulative effect of that, I mean, first, we've had declining transportation and road aids from the state forever. And so that's kind of how we got to this $90 million pickle. I mean, we, over the last few years, have tried to infuse the seal coating budget to keep that asphalt sealed so that water isn't getting in and breaking it up and shortening its life. But we only in recent years gained ground to where we're holding our own on seal coating. I feel like we were, early on, at least in my tenure, we were behind on all of it. And we used to spend a lot more on infrastructure than we spend now. Now, recently, I think in the last year or so, transportation aids from the state have gone up more than we expected. But, you know, we have been begging the state for, I would say, 9 years that I can remember, to ratchet up that aid, because we don't have the luxury of, we could, but we have not instituted a wheel tax. It was wildly unpopular when we went to referendum, so we didn't do it. And there's no other way for us, other than either borrowing or tax increment financing, for us to do more roads than what we can afford off of the levy. Now, I know Alan's report mentioned the fact that, you know, this plan includes no tax increment streets, correct?
Right, not at this point.
So if we would find that there was capacity in some of our tax increment districts to add a couple extra streets, use some of that increment to shine up those streets, quality infrastructure is a stimuli to good development. So, you know, a reasonable person would think that not a lot of people are going to rush to develop into an area where the roads are horrific and the utilities don't work. So we have in the past added a street or two using tax increment financing, because what that does is it allows us to spread that cost over all of the taxing entities, not just our own taxpayers. But when you use tax increment money, you get a little bit from the county, a little bit from the schools, a little bit from NTC, and a little bit from us. And so that always gives us the ability to get maybe one more street or two more streets. But on average, if we're paying $120,000 for one block, you can't get very far and in 1 year. So if we are only spending about $3 million versus $4 or $5 million, we can always get a little more done if we find that we have some capacity in the districts to address at least the worst rated streets in that vicinity. And those districts also have the ability to spend within a half mile of their boundary if it would be necessary. And, you know, I think with First Avenue, that was what happened. So, you know,
Yeah, I would just like to point out, I mean, we have done some pretty major projects over the last couple of years. I mean, last summer was a big year with Thomas Street getting done, the second phase, First Avenue, and Town Line, you know, 3 projects that had been around for, you know, probably 15 years. They needed to be reconstructed. There was a lot of money on those, so that was, you know, there was a lot of money that city stuck into those 3 streets, and that was a good thing. It was major projects. So, I mean, some of the other streets, you know, so in my mind, some of the other streets may have suffered a little bit because we took all that money and put it into 3 projects, but they were 3 major projects, were a great improvement to the city.
yep. It was a wild summer, and certainly conducive to good orange barrel rentals. I mean, we had a lot of stuff that was under construction at one time and a lot of detours, bigger detours than we've ever had. So, comments, Tom, did you have your hand up? Go ahead, Tom, and then Deb.
Yeah, this, for the batch for next year, what are the plans for street lighting? Because isn't there like a sort of decorative lighting on Eau Claire? But outdated, I suppose, and whatnot. And that, the same question for the, you know, the adjacent streets that'll be done at the same time. And if they're going to be replaced like with the new, you know, low-level efficient lighting, what becomes of the old lighting?
On Eau Claire Boulevard, there is some, I don't want to call it street lighting, it's more of accent lighting at the intersections. It's not a full-blown corridor, they're just kind of at the intersections to accent those. So on the 2021 budget, which I did include, I counted up, there was 12 street lamps out there, there's like $5,000 a lamp, you built $60,000 I put in the budget for relamping those, replacing those.
Just the ones at intersections?
Correct. Where they are now, we would put some new, I think we would work to try and keep the decorative feel, maybe not match what we have, but maybe we'd be trying to work with some distributors to try and find something that matches that existing character out there, but not necessarily to light the whole thing. I mean, that would be, you know what those cost, at $5,000 a pole, and 6 to 8 lights per block. I mean, you can do the math on that. The budget that I've included does not include a complete street lighting, but just to replace the ones that are there now.
And what would become of the 12 existing lights?
They'd
Are they
probably-
reusable?
No.
One of the
A
things
lot
that-
of them are, sorry,
Well, one
Lisa.
of the things that we've done in this committee always is, or a few years ago, we asked that when a street and road project comes with a plan for a rebuild, one of the things that we've asked engineering to do is do at least an intermediate analysis of what the lighting is to determine if it's sufficient or not for safety. And, and for walkability in the neighborhood. So we found sometimes we've had to add lights, and sometimes replacing what's there was good enough. One thing we always look at, though, too, is sometimes with a total reconstruction, you can't help but take down mature trees. And when you take down mature trees, as sad as that is, you remove a huge tree canopy, sometimes the lights that are there are more effective. But one other thing, we've always been reluctant to add often mid-block streetlights unless the street turns or curves at mid-block. But we've had neighborhood groups that have in the past requested a mid-block streetlight, and when there's a reason to have one, if you can put it on an existing WPS light pole, they're not super expensive, but they're very effective, and they're often cheaper to put up and cheaper to operate than replacing with decorative. We did decorative on all of First Ave and all of Second Ave, but sometimes if we can get by with increasing the lighting using the existing light poles, we can get the same result without adding $5,000 per lamp. Deb, go ahead with your comment.
I was just going to mention what you were talking about, Lisa, that in my neighborhood at 4th and Elm, it ended up a couple of years ago, the light was poor, and the Clark Street gas station, the Clark gas station, excuse me, seemed to minimize their lighting. And it just happens that Dennis inquired, and I guess the bulb was burnt out, the old-fashioned bulbs, and it was replaced by LED. So I thought it was just the existing swap. And at some point, I'm hoping in the budget process that we can look at that I thought Mayor Tipple had said a few years ago that we spend like $500,000 on lighting. And I would be interested in, if we went to all LED, what would be involved in doing that. It's something on the other budget. But the one concern I do have about the 2021, and it happens, I've had a neighbor that was at Mount View for a number of months, so I know they're all in Pat Peckham's District 1 district. So, and I know a number of streets are in poor condition there. But it would be nice for our other residents to see some projects that are located in different areas of the city. So I guess I would just suggest that for future years. Thank you.
Thank you. If we were to add a couple more, let's say through our budget process that we determine through tax increment financing, that we would be able to add a street or two, it would certainly make sense that if we would keep on our radar, that we would want those streets to be in another area of the city and not also confined to the southeast side. I mean, the southeast side is getting a big project. Kent Street was a big project, so we've not been paying attention down there. But if we could perhaps pick, if we're going to add a couple streets, add them in a different zone, I guess, so that we can spread that around a little bit. That the optics of that, I think, is better. Deb's right, where you'll have one neighborhood. Well, all neighborhoods have a street that's bad somewhere. And I think if the optics are that we're only working in one particular area, true or not, I think that perception is negative. So, go ahead, Jim, and then Lou.
Before the meeting, I drove those streets for the 21 redo. And yeah, they're in rough shape, but the speed limits it's a nice neighborhood drive. There's stop signs every couple blocks. I don't see any manholes that I drive over and have a 3-inch drop like on a street in my area. And when you can drive pretty straight and miss some of the potholes in that southeast area of the city. Not like a street in my area where cars weave back and forth to miss the drops. In the spring, people take blacktop off the boulevards, because the plows plow the street up because it's deteriorating so much. And there's many places that have that. I'm not saying we should cancel any of the list because they all need it, but I would like to know what streets are on the other streets section that are fours that may need to come up in the future, and how that's, go ahead.
Every street on this list is a 3 or a 4. 3 is worse than a 4, so there's nothing, the reality is too, is next year when we rate it again, there'll be more on there.
Does the criteria include a number of vehicles that travel the road, the bus routes, the school buses that travel it? Does that
No,
involve at all?
no, but that is a good point, though. No, it does not. That just considers the rating of the road. Now, this year, this summer, we're doing Cedar Street and Kickbush. Cedar Street rose to the top because of all the water main breaks, and it needed it. Kickbush kind of rose to the top because of the school on the end there, the Hawthorne School. So we're getting a lot of complaints from the school district, the bus drivers, the walk, it wasn't even walkable. So that did help elevate that project, the fact that the school is on the end. So we do take that into account too, and, it's kind of based on aldermans,
Well, I think factors like that, where there's lots of traffic, schools, where, it's going to get more use, probably needs to be
Yep.
built first, And my question with lighting, you said those Dectra posts are like 5,000?
Each.
So the 70-plus posts we put on First Avenue and that 5 or 6 block was 5,000 each?
Yep.
Yeah.
Tax increment
But
funded.
That includes the cable between them but installed, you can look at about 5,000 apiece.
So how much would it have cost us if we just put the regular tall overhead ones in there, spaced them out normal?
I mean, it's more per pole, but right, you have a lot less, so it is less expensive.
And I've heard residents in some of the areas, when they first came to town, some of the residents didn't like those lower ones because they were shining into their windows in their home a little more.
They're dimmable at night, though. If we have them set, they all dim at night.
That's just
don't
what
they?
I've heard.
Yeah.
Yep.
There are, it is just to get to lighting, it is kind of a double-edged. Some people, want them right in front, they want it lighting up the yard, and the next person says, no, I don't, it shines in my yard, I want it on my side yard. So it is,
Oh, yeah.
it is a give and take as to, we
Nothing's
try and
perfect.
keep an equal
Right.
spacing, but I do hear complaints
Well, and we have a continued.
both ways.
We have a continued back and forth with neighborhood groups about safety. And so, dark feels like unsafe. And so we have lots of neighborhood groups that advocate for increased lighting. And the other thing they want is an elevated aesthetic in their neighborhood to give it a sense of place. And so when Second Avenue was given those light fixtures that are unique but not like downtown, they now have their own sense as the West River District. They've got their own identity. First Ave wanted that too. And we find that when we've installed some of those, that lighting up an area is a deterrent, certainly a deterrent. I mean, people are less likely to conduct their malfeasance in plain view with bright light on them than they would in a dark area where, they can get away with stuff. So it is a struggle, though. It's super expensive. I mean, there's,
And another way that streets rise to the top, too, we have had neighborhood groups and residents on a street sign a petition and actually petition to have streets done. And because there is just for the newer council member, there is a $42 per foot assessment per front foot. So you get neighborhoods, some don't want them, but when a neighbor, what the majority of the residents on the street want the project and are willing to pay the $42 a foot, I think that helps elevate the project too. So we have seen streets where they and Eau Claire Boulevard, I don't know that there was the petition for it, but there was a strong neighborhood group that came forward asking for it. So kind of
Where-
that's how,
let's talk through tax increment financing use for infrastructure in general terms. We can probably get another $1 million or $2 million a year accomplished if we have that tool. And we'll bring Mary Ann up also, I guess, if we have questions about that. But in general, how do you guys feel about that? I know that we talk a lot about TIDs. We talk about it for development, we talk about them for job creation. and we talk about them for infrastructure. And I know that, you know, in the past, a lot of us have had strong feelings for and against that use, but knowing that we're sitting on $90 million of unresolved infrastructure, if we could get a couple more done each year, is that worth our effort? How do you guys feel about that?
I think it's a great idea, because, you know, the whole concept of TID financing is, you know, partially based on dealing with infrastructure, not simply, you know, attracting development per se.
Right, and you're using the increment based on the growth in an area, so the new project's taxes essentially are feeding back into that district to, you know, you're not charging it to the rest of the levy, essentially. Lou, you have a comment?
Well, yeah, I did.
Go ahead.
First of all, would I have to stay in contact then with you and Eric then to see if the Rosecrans qualifies for an overlay or something until it gets fixed?
I think we'll be working through that as the summer goes along. I
Okay.
think we'll be working with DPW.
Okay, yeah, I would, I would like to see tax increment funding being used for getting our infrastructure fixed. And I'm going to give you a perfect example with all these apartment buildings going up on 17th Avenue there where Mountain Lanes are. You know, you got all these people that are going to want to move into these fancy new apartments, and you got a crummy road to get there. I mean, the road's a washboard. It needs
Correct.
fixing. From Triggs north, it was fixed a couple years ago and from Triggs south, where it really needed it
Bad.
mostly, there it lays and crumbles, or not crumbles, but, so yeah, I would go along with that.
Go ahead, Deb.
I was just going to say for some of the TIF districts, they're certainly kind of clustered in a business or well-traveled area. So there's some areas of the city, like I would think the northeast side, that are really not in that. So, and then I thought within the TIF, Marianne, you can go expanded by a half a mile. So that like Stewart Avenue, you could pick up a few blocks north of that or south of that to go ahead and go into those neighborhood. But in some areas, they're really, in the residential area, there is no TIF district.
Right, if there's no TID close enough, we can still do them, but they go into our CIP borrowing and we incur debt for them, which isn't a problem as long as we're retiring. We always try to retire at least an equal amount of debt to what we add. So if you pay off $10 million, you certainly don't want to borrow more than $10 million. You want to at least keep an even keel so that you're not taking that upward spike. I guess, Marianne, do you want to talk about that a little bit?
Sure. So, you know, if you think about tax increment districts, I know some people are new and maybe not quite as familiar with them, but, you know, typically when a district is initially created, it's not generating a lot of tax, because that's the whole purpose of creating a district, is to build tax base in a geographic area. So those are the times where we have to, I guess, operate kind of leanly in the tax increment district. So we do, you know, the bare minimum, because we don't want to encounter such huge deficits that, number one, it creates a big burden on the general fund, and number two, that you risk not being able to retire the district with a zero balance, that you would have some huge negative balance. So the city, you know, we retired tax increment district number 5 this year in 2020, and the expenditure periods for TID 6, which funded Cedar Street and funded Thomas Street and funded part of First Avenue, that expenditure period actually ends, or let's see, what day is it? I think it ends June 10th of this year. So we really can't spend any more money. We, you know, have to be under contract already. And then TID 7 expires like January 10th of 2021. So again, we would have to be under contract already not already, but by January 10th for a project, for it to be eligible to be charged to the TID. So those are two TID districts that we will no longer have as a means to fund infrastructure projects. Now, that doesn't mean that they're still not going to add value to us, because if you recall, TID 6, usually once the expenditure period ends, you have 5 years to recover any accumulated deficits, and then you retire the district. So while TID 6 expenditure period ends in 2020, we'll be retiring it in 2025 because that's when we'll have paid off all of the debt. With TID 7, which was actually going to be able to retire earlier. So its expenditure period ends January of 2021, but we're going to retire it in 2022 because the deficits it didn't have as many accumulated deficits. So the good thing about the districts, though, is then you can use that increment that is no longer being allocated to that district to fund other expenses, because that value is now available for other things. So I did, for Alan's benefit, calculate. So TID 5, which we terminated this year, it basically relieves about $300,000 of property taxes that the city's been generating, our share of that. TID 7, when it retires in 2022, will bring another $440,000 of taxes each year. And then TID 6, when it expires in 2025, will bring $940,000. So you can see that
So
if...
almost $2 million.
Yes, yes. So if the council would, you would have several options. One would be to just reduce your tax rate. Another would be to say, we're going to use that to fund ongoing street maintenance. So that will be something, but it's, relief in the future. It's not immediate relief because we have to wait for the districts to retire. We could certainly, and when I look at the other tax increment districts that we have, I don't really see them as being in a situation to take on a lot of other projects right now. Otherwise, we're going to increase our deficits. But I think, if this committee wanted us to, we could look at some funding options to beef up the street projects so that you could see what the implications would be going forward.
I think those
We could
numbers would be
certainly do
important for
that.
us to have, because if there was a way to get at it even without TID, if she had another funding tool that we could access.
Absolutely.
Because when you look at other cities, as Lisa pointed out, they're relying on some other financial resources to help fund their street projects that the city doesn't currently enjoy. Wheel tax is one of them. A number of communities are going to like a linear foot charge to their taxpayers. So La Crosse, I think, is either already implemented it or is just getting ready to implement a new assessment for streets. Milwaukee does it. Weston did it and then reversed it. And then stormwater, when Alan's putting together these budgets, he's replacing the stormwater utility that's underneath in the capital cost. So that's a burden of the street replacement that right now the city has to fund with debt retirement and on the general levy, but any community that has a stormwater utility is funding that share of that project through that utility. So we, like the city really has very few tools in our toolbox to fund street improvements. And that's why we have turned to the tax increment districts. And, one of the things that we haven't talked about, we talked about Thomas Street and First Ave and Cedar, Second Ave. I mean, we've done a lot of streets. But we also do asphalt overlay with the TIF districts. We've done concrete improvements with the districts. So it's not just the big construction. We really have been using that tool as much as we possibly could.
Sidewalks and maintenance, too.
Yep. Really
Right.
trying to use that as a financial resource for the city so that we could, keep up with it. And, I know when we drive the streets, but, if you travel to other communities, there's a lot of communities
They're
that
just as
have bad
bad, yeah.
infrastructure. The one other thing I was just going to mention is, I live on the southeast side, and the streetlights are concrete. And, I look at them, and they look almost brand new. And they must be, 50 years old? I would really like the city to do a cost-benefit analysis to using those concrete streetlights. Wausau Tile builds them, as do other companies. They don't require any painting. they are, obviously have lasted a long time. Both my kids live in Milwaukee. They've done a couple of new parks down in Milwaukee, and that's what they're using, is these concrete streetlights. And, I don't know what the cost of them is compared to a metal one, but I think it would be an interesting exercise to see, because of the lack of maintenance needed on them, and how they still look good. You wouldn't know that they were 50 years old.
Well, that's the thing. I mean, if they're even close to $5,000 a light, why would we not even at least try to mix that up a little bit?
I think Rick's been working on those, because we get knockdowns and stuff, on that end of town, and so, he's looking at those and see where they could be made,
Okay.
and stuff, so that's kind of in the works. And then the people down on the southeast side, like from the neighborhood group and stuff, have, reached out and asked about the lights and what's it's gonna look like. And
Yeah, because they've
and-
got historical
Correct.
significance
Yeah.
now. I think it would be nice to
Yeah.
maintain that.
Sure.
Yep.
Now, with regard to, I mean, we talked about TID financing conceptually. Do we also want to look at the difference between what our financing would look like with and without a stormwater utility? 3 or 4 prior councils have kicked around the idea of creating a stormwater utility, and they've backed off. They went to referendum on it like 4 years ago, 5 years ago. And that, we held a number of public meetings and neighborhood meetings trying to get people to understand that. At the same time, we were changing over the garbage system. And any new charge is always met with negativity, but I think that if we would increase our ability to communicate and get people to really understand that right now, stormwater management is balancing itself on the backs of private homeowners and not necessarily businesses and schools and churches that have these massive parking facilities and pay nothing into that fund. So the homeowners would see a whole lot of relief if we would have the courage to create a stormwater utility. That said, the only way we can create a stormwater utility is we have to repeal a approximately 14, 15-year-old ordinance, direct legislation, that says we will go to referendum on any and all brand-new charges. Now, that direct legislation has run its course, and we as a council could vote to repeal that tomorrow. The optics of it are not perfect, and the folks who circulated the direct legislation to get it done 14 years ago are perfectly willing to go out and pound the pavement to pass it again. But that said, I think that's a discussion that we as a new council should have and see. We may never catch up on this $90 million list if we don't figure something out. And we won't have TIDs forever, because at some point we will pay them off and retire them, and then there's nothing. So, I mean, obviously you're gaining money back into your general fund when you don't have TIDs, but we have limited tools. And so I think we need to start to figure something out. Do we want Mary Ann to present to us, well, and even Alan could too, on the value of a stormwater utility as far as what your numbers look like with one and without one? So we could, I mean, we have to find, if we're interested in that, we have to be able to explain to the public why it's a good idea and get them to understand that that's not a regressive tax. Tom?
Yeah, it must have been 20 minutes ago, I was sitting here going, geez, is it about time to readdress a stormwater utility? It went to referendum how many years ago?
5 or 6.
5 or 6 years ago. And I know we tried to put forward a solid argument for why this is a good idea for, Joe homeowner and Joe taxpayer resident, but it was voted down. And when we were shackled by that ordinance, requiring us to have such a referendum for this sort of thing. It's something we really need to look at, because, it's something that would really help us and help, the vast majority of citizens. But it's easily misunderstood, and you get some pushback from, the business sector and such. So, a good, benefit analysis, a good benefit for, regular Joe taxpayer would be important. But we also maybe have to think about, taking that step and exercising our authority to rescind the old ordinance.
It would be worth talking about, at least at a future meeting, to see what the numbers look like before and after, because I think that's something that You know, even when we changed the garbage system, if we had gone to a flat rate on garbage where every house pays $35 a year for garbage or whatever it was, that certainly would be different than having, you know, a house of this value and a house of this value pay two disparately different amounts that produce the same amount of trash because they're paying for it on their tax bill. That's the same thing with, you know, stormwater. We don't have a utility, so all of these things keep underpinning the levy and driving that tax up. So when somebody looks at, you know, Weston has one, right? Does Weston have a stormwater utility? So they compare our taxes with the suburbs taxes, and they go, well, it's too expensive to live in Wausau. Well, why is that? And if that would have a positive impact on our mill rate over time, we would be more in line with our neighboring communities than we are today, because right now, the only argument you have to talk with people about when they complain about tax rate is, well, we have all these services, you know, and so that only gets you so far. So we're getting better at communicating, though, and I think through use of video. When we had those first public information meetings about that referendum, like at each meeting, 4 or 5 people came, and half the people in the room were council members. People just didn't come. You know, and we got to the neighborhood groups with the presentation, and sometimes that went well, and sometimes it didn't go well. You know, and then we also that time had 3 referendum questions. It was city administrator, that, and new garbage, all at once. And so, you know, I think that too was a little much. So as a committee, we should start to look at, I think, where we would be at if we had such a utility. Tom?
Yeah, just going back to the Eau Claire Boulevard lighting question, you know, it has struck me as I've driven down that street that it does have that historic look. It adds, you know, a distinct character to that neighborhood that I'm sure is embraced by the people who live there. And what are the options for just retrofitting those posts for new lighting?
I guess I'd have to talk to Rick Pergolsky, our
You know, I think it's,
electrical.
you know, like we found money to do the columns up at Stewart Park because of, you know, the historic character that they, you know, they're embraced by that neighborhood, and people were really happy to see them, you know, saved. And I think there's probably going to be that kind of feeling in this neighborhood as well if we can come forward and say, you know, rather than replacing them with, you know, some new modern decorative lighting, that we're going to keep these, but we're going to rewire, you know, retrofit, you know, for, and yes, this might tick up, you know, the price per pole, I don't know. I have no idea. It seems to me leaving a pole and rewiring it should be less than getting a new pole and installing it. So there's that. I hope that may be something we can
Yeah,
look into.
we can definitely look at that.
Okay.
Did-
Additional comments or questions? Go ahead, Deb.
I was just going to say, I remember talking about looking at the referendum, and I guess I had some confusion that I pretty much collect with my kind of business size gutters, underground the water, and then end up putting in a low part in my yard. And so I think Alan had mentioned about, well, we'll do this overhead view of your roof and look at how much, the size of your roof, and base that on how much is going on. But I think as part of what I'd like to focus on, there is so many streets that are issues that I think as a committee, it would be helpful to look at other options about how can we grind up the old streets and do an overlay or whatever that would be effective for maybe up to 5 years, so that we can try to get more streets looking better. And if there's ways we can do that, that would be some savings. And like for the lights that are, you know, on Eau Claire and that, for LED bulbs, they're pretty much being retrofitted for everything, and then they have a life expectancy of like 20 to 50 years, and then they have more light, and then their actual cost or utility-wise is a lot less. So I think there's ways that we can go ahead and do some retrofitting, so to make it brighter and reduce our costs. But I think with so many streets, it's a little daunting. I mean, I understand you've got your 5-year plan, but in looking at it briefly, is that when you look at the streets, it looks like a 100-year plan. And,
This feels like one.
and I don't think our neighbors are going to be happy with that as an answer. So I'm just wondering if we could somehow look at other economical ways that we can address more streets in more neighborhoods. Would be, in my opinion, I'm hoping we can do that as a focus in the
I feel
next
like
couple of
skin
years.
patch might be the way. Mr. Neal?
Yeah, it's an intriguing idea, and I know that there's underlying and pun intended issues, when we do street projects, as to take care of, aging and outdated infrastructure. But, where applicable, like, I look at the job that's just been done on Franklin Street Hill, which I think was kind of like a mulching it up and then covering it and whatnot.
Overlay.
Yep,
And it looks gorgeous. I mean, it's a transformation. It's I had gotten numerous, comments prior about when are they going to do this, because it was a mess, particularly near the top of the hill. And now it's just, it's the cat's pajamas. But I'm sure part and parcel of that was consideration about what was underneath, and, I don't know how long that fix is intended to last. But, to Alder Ryan's point, where in the city can we identify opportunities where, maybe there's a not so old, system underneath the street, and we might do more of that kind of work.
So to answer that question, so if you look on the 2021 infrastructure budget, which is included in this, that would be under the asphalt overlay. And so that's where that money from Franklin Street came from. So that's
that's
under.
$250,000?
Yeah, it's $250,000. I mean, and we did, like Mary Ann said, we did do an additional, it's almost $600,000 of asphalt paving over on the west side of the hospital, over like 32nd Avenue, 36th Avenue, Royalston Court, that area. That's being done right now, and that was done with TID 7 money. So on top of the $250,000 asphalt overlay that was done as part of this general budget, there was $600,000 out of TID 7 and asphalt overlay. So, that was a significant, just, the TID contributed 3 times as much as the general budget in that instance. So the $250,000 that was budgeted this year, yes, that went to Franklin, and it went to those outside lanes on Merrill Avenue. If you guys have driven that was horrible.
It's a lot better.
We would have, I haven't gotten a lot of complaints. I'm surprised. I think people are waiting for us to finish it. But, when we did that section of Franklin, and to be honest with you, I would have liked to go on a little further each way. But when we ran the numbers, we wanted to do Franklin Street, and we wanted to get those outside lanes on Merrill Avenue done. So we kind of, it's a matter of crunching the numbers and trying to get it. I would like to build a little, like for instance, on Merrill Avenue, there's 5 inches of pavement there, 5 inches thick, so we milled the top 2 inches off. If we'd had a little more budget, I probably would have milled 2.5 to 3, to get it, to beef it up a little bit more. But, so we stretched our budget as far as we could. We tried to get as much as we could. But that asphalt overlay is where that money comes from. I think where we're talking about these skin patches would probably be more money in the DOT's asphalt budget, where the Public Works Department would actually do the thin overlays. So I think that's where we're hoping to get more money in that budget. We still we still do so where these asphalt overlays are done exactly in those areas like Merrill Avenue, Franklin Street. They were rebuilt. I think Franklin Street was about 19 years ago. So if you put new asphalt down, typically, on a cycle, you like to mill it and overlay it again in about 15 years. So both of those, met that criteria. So we don't like to mill and overlay and spend that kind of money in an area that has old utilities, but we do. So people sometimes don't understand, man, that street was reconstructed 15 years ago. Why are you milling and overlaying that? But so that's the method behind that you try and preserve your. And then the curb and gutter were good. The curb and gutter are both good on both those streets. So the drainage is fine. So it makes sense to stick some money into the asphalt.
Just as an introductory budget number, as, let's say, we're planning for our 2021 budget ask, I mean, obviously, it'll come through here again, and then it goes through a number of finance meetings, CIP and council. If, let's say that you were to add another $250,000 for the purpose of skin patch, that would be done in-house, so you'd have some labor savings. how far could you get on that? Can you get 4 or 5 streets on it?
Well, it depends how long, right, how many blocks.
Right.
We'd have to run those numbers. I don't have that off the top of my head.
Okay. Because I was just thinking if reconstruction is about 100,000 a block, is overlay half of that?
No, that's not even probably a quarter, or, it's relatively cheap.
So think how far we could get. If we could find $250,000 somewhere that we could use. I mean, but that said, that's a lofty number too. So we may find in the end that maybe we have 75,000 or 100. But, if we were going to just see how much we could accomplish. I mean, if we need to make some mileage on the list, I think if we could get 5 or 6 years out of a skin patch, we could have a little time to catch up to ourselves on the rest of it, and then we wouldn't have constant infrastructure complaints in every district. That's what we're hearing all the time.
A question on,
Go ahead, Jim.
you wouldn't want to do that on roads where you are going to tear it up soon for,
Well, I guess that's kind of we don't want to put a permanent asphalt overlay on, like where we mill 2 inches and put 2 inches back. But we're to the point now, we kind of try to stay off these streets we're going to reconstruct soon. But we're to the point where this list is,
so this 1 inch is a 15-year?
it's going to depend. I mean, it's going to be 5 years on some streets, maybe 10 years on others.
Do you do,
We don't have a mill machine in the city, so it would be just an overlay what's there.
got it. Do you do surveys of what's underground before, and use that in your factors on what streets you're going to redo?
Yep, we have, on our GIS system, we have every pipe in the city modeled, not modeled, but we know what year it is, what age it's in. We have all the water main break history online. So when we look at a street, we know how many water main breaks are in each block. We know,
Do you use cameras and,
yeah, sewer department televises the lines.
so
We
you know which ones are the worst?
Yep, so we have the sewer department has a CIP lining project that's going on right now too, every year. They line the older mains in the city so we don't have to dig them up. They have lines that can't wait, they're collapsing. So they go through and they line them because they know we're not going to get to that street reconstruction. So it helps reduce the infiltration of the stormwater.
That's why they lined us up by
Yeah.
my area.
And it preserves the old mains and it keeps them from digging and it decreases the infiltration to the plant.
Good to know, thank you.
Yep.
Okay.
So did you want me to step through any of this? I can kind of go through it quick.
Are there questions on it? Well, yeah, why don't you just walk us through a little bit and,
So this is, if you look on the 2021 budget, the first side, this is what we're talking about, the storm sewer. So this is part of the 260,000 for Eau Claire to grant. That's the storm sewer pipes that'll go under the road, the new inlets. That's going to come out of this general budget. So when you look at that, it's like $300,000. But when we talk about a utility, a lot more expenses than that can come out of the utility, the street sweeping, the maintenance that DPW does. So there's a lot more money than that can come out. So when we go down, so we also do concrete pavement repairs, which actually we're doing, if anybody's been on 7th Street right now, they're doing it on 7th Street. So what we like to do is, I'm sure you've seen a lot of patches around town, so we do concrete joint repair. The city's, thankfully, I think I'm thankful that the city's been keeping money in that fund every year. This year, we also added $100,000 out of the TID, so that project had $350,000. The $100,000 from the TID went on Stewart Avenue in front of Applebee's in that area. We did concrete joint repair in there out of the TID. So that $100,000 came out of there. The other 250 is going into 7th Street and 3rd Avenue, north of Bridge. That's got to be done yet. So that's why that there's concrete pavement repairs. Pavement markings, now I know we're a bike city where everybody likes the bike markings. You can think about the bike markings that we've added in the last several years. Just look out front here in City Hall, Thomas Street, 1st Avenue, Stewart Avenue. But the consequence with that is that it takes money. These pavement markings are 5 to 7 years. And so that budget, that $100,000 pavement marking is above and beyond what our DPW crews do. We have a paint truck at DPW. They do cold paint. They don't do hot paint. What this would do is it's the permanent pavement marking where you see the big trucks. So we have a contract with that every year to try and keep up with our pavement marking. So there's $100,000 in there. This committee, I'll try and be quick, but the RRFBs on River Street, Washington, that was voted in by this committee last year to put those RRFBs, which is those flashing beacons down by the Washington Street, where the pedestrian crossing is there. That's about all on that page. The water main and sanitary sewer, now that's kind of something we should also mention too. When we redo these streets, there's a huge expense for the sewer utility and the water utility. So that is, those expenses are below. You can see that they're just for Eau Claire and those streets we're proposing this year, the utility is going to have to cough up another $1 million to fix the sewer and the water. Just looking on the front page, or on the opposite side, you know, we have a bunch of DOT projects that if you don't know, First Avenue last year was a DOT project, and we got funding for that. We do have a large project coming up, which we got, it's called STP Urban Funding, which we get funding from the state and the feds. So that project coming up is Stewart Avenue on the west side of town from 48th to 72nd. We got about $3 million worth of federal money there. So there's money in there. We're $250,000 to hire a consultant to get those plans up and going. The DOT process is a 3 to 5 year process, design process. It's not like when our street projects in the city, we design in-house, but the DOT stuff, we have consultants that do that, and then, so there's a cost to that. Below that, you see the street improvement costs, which we've talked about. We do put money in the budget for boulevard trees, we have. Also, then they go down below, there's the asphalt overlay and alleys. We did have 2 alleys we did this summer. Those come in by petition, so we always keep a small amount of money in there to pave a couple alleys, at least one every year. And then we have traditionally had a sidewalk replacement project, 'cause that's going on around town right now, where we get complaints. So, I mean, legally, if we have a complaint and we don't fix it, we could be held liable for that. So we patch them with asphalt temporarily, and then we keep the list and we come back the next year and replace those. So that's where that money goes. And then I do have a small amount of money in there for the Eau Claire Boulevard street lighting. I think that's, you know, whether we retrofit the other ones or come up with some new design, we will need some sort of budget in there for that, and that was my estimate on that. And I get, you know, in my memo, I came up, you know, it doesn't seem like a lot of work, and that budget comes to about $3 million, as compared to last year, we spent $1.8 million. And I think that $1.8 million in '20 was historically low. When I looked through and I tried to do some, you know, that's one of the downfalls, not one of the downfalls, but I think Mary Ann's been doing a great job of getting money out of the TIDS to fund some of these projects. But I think that has taken the gap of this, you know, we've kept shrinking the capital budget, and now the TID money's going away, and now the capital budget's down here, and now it's kind of been a consequence. I don't know if it's a consequence of it, but it's just where we are. So, you know, I looked back in the early 2000s, we had this capital budget someplace up to $7 million. We're down to 1.8 million. So.
How much does a mill machine cost?
Depends. You probably find a used one somewhere. There's not a lot of them around, but we could hire out just the milling.
I'm curious well, that too, you could contract out the milling too, but, you know, that's something that I guess I'm interested in, because we always at DPW have said that if they can get a deal on a piece of equipment that they will use that will eliminate the cost of our outsourcing, if they'll use it enough, we've been willing to buy that stuff. But, you know, and a lot of that stuff has a relatively long lifespan. So I guess I'm interested in what the cost to contract that out to somebody would be versus the cost to own the machine and, you know, do it as you can do it. Because sometimes one thing is if we find out that we've got project savings in other areas, or we save money on our CIP list, can we go back to the list and find some more work to get done? And every year we've kind of tried to do that. We've either tried to pick some stuff off the list that didn't make the cut, or we've tried to figure out, you know, is there maybe one more project we can get done, or can we get another block or two out of there? And so in the last year or so, we've been still cutting infrastructure when we have a need to get the mill rate under control, but I don't think we've been slashing and burning on that to the extent that we were 5 years ago. I mean, we've kind of slowed down on the infrastructure cutting because it's starting to pile up. We had no choice. We have to refocus our attention back. Our original plan, during the recession was, well, we'll take a year off. We'll take a year off from sidewalks, or we'll only do one street this year, or we'll take another year off. And so in the context of that, we would ask the staff, well, what happens if we take a year off? And they said, well, if you take 1 year off, it's not so bad. If you take 5 years off, you're behind the 8 ball. And so we stopped somewhere at about 2.5 years off on some of this stuff. So we just have to, in the context of our budget, because we, as a committee, have a significant role to play in the 2021 budget process. So in their budget ask, which has to survive many cuts and processes, if we would like to see them infuse their ask a little more, ask for a little more for asphalt overlay to do this mill and overlay skin patch type stuff, they can certainly make the ask. And when we get our numbers as far as what our cost to continue is versus what our added things are, determine where we would be at for the tax rate. If we know we can't afford it, we could always back off. But, maybe that's something that we have to look at as a committee, is have them raise that ask a little bit for this year.
Well, I think right now, last year we had got 1.9 million, and this year we're asking for 3. So,
That's a sizable increase already,
yeah.
so.
So, and last year we asked for more, and then it was cut back, and that's why Eau Claire Boulevard obviously got pushed to another year. And so when we get back to the streets, this 5-year plan really is up to this committee on how they want to see those streets, Now, Eau Claire Boulevard was pushed, and CISM last year approved that, but, if you want to keep that, you want to move that, you want to change that, but like 22, 23, 24, and moving on down, I mean, those are decisions that the CISM committee can make, along with the number of sheets of other streets that are listed. Typically, what we'll do then is we'll take the ones that you really want us to look at, and then we'll prioritize that, because we'll say, what do the utilities look like? Are we failing in certain situations? Are we having continuous issues with those streets? And we can do that for you. I think the other thing with, with our own maintenance in-house, and a couple years ago, we started looking at our operations down at streets, and when we do crack sealing down at streets, we have all the equipment to do that all the time, when they put the paper on the street and they do those cracks. That takes 11 to 13 guys that we have to do that operation. And we're very inefficient at it. We don't have all the tar kettles and everything else so we kind of backed away from that and started contracting that out. And what we've run into is that exactly what everybody around this area is talking about, is that we have been putting so much money into patching, and constantly having guys out 12 months a year. And what happens is we go to a block, we patch it, 10 days later, we're back there because everything's popping out. And so last year, we ended up paying more on our hot mix budget, beefing that up. We were out on Stewart Avenue. We did some of those thin overlays and stuff because we were out there every 2 weeks, and it just wasn't efficient for us. So we are looking at buying a new paver, where that should come to the Board of Public Work next week to make that selection. Mark is looking into a milling machine. I don't know what those cost. He's going to be looking at different sizes and different things that are going on. But we are looking at how we switch our operations and what we're focusing on to hopefully address exactly what everybody here's been talking about, to try to do better, with money that we get and what's allocated to us in our budget. So I appreciate the feedback, I think.
Yeah, I'd like to get us to
yeah.
a point where we can maybe have our crew better utilize its time for some proactive steps rather than damage control, because patchwork is a reactive step.
Right.
Something's already wrong and people are already complaining. So if we could get ourselves to that point, I think contracting out the crack sealing is a great idea, because if someone else can do it during the season and they're not horrifically more expensive than our crew being inefficient and doing it with half the crew, that certainly makes sense. I guess What do you guys think? I mean, are we kind of on the right path with what they're planning? Do we want to approve this plan and send this forward for the 2021 budget?
Do we have to do it today?
Probably not. I mean, you could
I don't
probably
think
hold
so.
it off for next month. Budget process isn't really underway in earnest until July anyway. So I would say if we would act upon this in either July or August,
A
we'd still be
month
in.
would be good for me to get some input.
Okay. You guys want, take a month, mull over the list. It's pretty daunting.
I agree, and it's especially because the focus for 2021, I just happen to know that there are streets in District 1, and I'm not necessarily saying I want to back that off, but there's just so many streets all around town that other people may feel is more warranted, so
That's
I
the
would
other,
like that
that's the other
extra
thing
time.
is, do we want to look at, now these projects, because they're close together and there's efficiencies in doing them all together, you probably want to do these as a batch, but, as we go forward, we also have Bertha Street and Ethel Street that are also in District 1. So would we maybe want to take a look at, if we're going to put a bunch of money in District 1 in 2021, maybe down the list, we'd want to take a couple of those District 1 streets and swap them for District 10 or 11 streets, or District 8 streets, or whatever, and, see if we could have a good balance between east and west, or a good balance between north and south, so that people can see impact in more areas. They'll know that we're not done, but if they see us working more in areas that they travel every day, I think they would have a more positive view of what we're doing.
And it would be nice to get some higher volume streets taken care of, or compared to maybe some lower, or some ones that really need the infrastructure now, total infrastructure now, and maybe, so. I know the staff does a great job looking at this, I think we have a great staff here, they're very informative, very professional, so I really appreciate what they do for us, and hopefully can help them move along and get it done right.
I think we're on a positive track. Well, let's hold action on this item then until next month. We can all think it through. Maybe then we'll know a little more about skin patch and milling machines, and we can make that decision next time.
Madam Chair, do we anticipate that what staff will put forward a month from now will be substantially different from what we're looking at today?
It could be. I mean, do we agree in concept that in areas where we can find other financing tools, if Mary Ann has some ideas for alternative financing tools, even if they're not TID, I think we want to hear about that. I think we want her to come back and talk to us about that. If there's other ways that we can pay for this to get a little more done, and we also can look at our new debt versus our debt retirement, see what we're paying off and what we have yet to pay for, and see if we have any room there in our borrowing, to add infrastructure. We certainly can take a look at that, but, then also we can, if we agree in concept that we're okay with the use of TID where it's available, if we want to use TID when it's available without creating an adverse impact in the districts. We don't want a bunch of distressed districts, and we don't want a bunch of unsustainable deficits where they're all underwater forever. So if we see an area that has increment that's available to help us, or where there's, revenue that's not going to create a detriment in the TID district, if we're in agreement that we want to use that where we can, but we don't want to excessively use it and damage the district. And then if she's got some other ideas, we could certainly have Mary Ann come back and talk to us about that, if we want to go that route.
I guess I also wanted to mention that if Alan can somehow rate those that would be, overlay versus skimming, or what other options, and the roads better, which, if there's a way we can do more roads that would be more cost effective, I think that's part of it. It isn't necessarily a long-term solution, but it may be for residents, it's making it better for them now instead of just this constant patching, which is not going anywhere.
We have a really colorful GIS map that we don't have in the packet today that shows what these streets look like with their Paisley ratings. We could bring that next month, update it and bring that colored map. But if we could also add an overlay to that GIS map that shows which of those streets would be candidates for skin patch, where the utilities aren't awful, that would be helpful. I think if,
I guess they would all be a candidate for the skin patch, every street on here.
okay,
But it would
good
be.
to know, but
it
if you
would
have
be-
30
it
water
would-
breaks on one of them, I think we'd want to
Right, but
know.
it would be a matter of ranking which streets are the worst. So which streets, and probably all have a list of those, but I think it's going to take probably a combined effort of meeting with our DPW supervisors to come up with a list, the worst of the worst, basically, to get overlaid. I guess
The
I am
good, the
looking.
bad, and the ugly.
Yeah, I guess I would need a little direction. I guess I'm a little bit, Eau Claire Boulevard was brought forward because, like Eric said, it was approved by the CISM committee last year, and then it was cut during the budget process. So really because it was approved last year and told to get moved forward to 21, it was really, we really didn't want to bring any other streets forward because that's what the CISM committee directed us to do. So if that one, basically 1.6 million or whatever, if you want to direct that other ways to some, I don't know where we go from here because I could predict, represent a couple smaller streets that do have significant water main breaks that, maybe we move to that direction, but I guess, I don't know how we go to how we pick 2 or 3 other streets based other than that.
Well, there's so many, it's just, yeah.
It's, if I can,
I think it would be nice, if anybody on the committee, take a couple weeks, and if you could email us, like, in your districts, which ones you feel.
Are the worst?
Yeah, or, 2 or 3 of them, or 4, and we could take a look at them and, and kind of run it through all of our criteria, and then, because I think it'll be important for us to, next month, have a kind of a 5-year list to go by, because like Alan said, Eau Claire was approved, so we've been doing all the engineering, the surveying and stuff like that on that street, so that's basically all done. All the field work out
Yep.
there is already done. And so, so once those streets start getting constructed or designed, then we'll be moving on the list for 22 projects. So that's, that's where I think it would be nice to get some input on specific streets from the
Because of the
committee
cost
members.
efficiencies and the, I guess, I'd say average lifespan of skin patch, what would it look like in terms of impact if we would switch off years? Let's say that one year, we would take $1 million and put it in skin patch and see how far you could get on that map. And then the following year, you would take that same $1 million and reconstruct a big one. And then maybe the next year, you take another $500,000 and go out and skin patch. Maybe they don't all need to be reconstructions. We have a separate budget for overlay already. We have DOT projects already, so that wouldn't be our only road work. But in our street and road, in our reconstruction plan, what if we would divert that for 1 year, or at least half of it maybe, and see how far we could get on buying some time with some of this list? Would that be an efficient use of our time and money, or not?
In my, DPW does have a budget for asphalt that they buy every year. So I think we're looking at increasing that budget and keeping this
Well,
selfishly. But
yeah,
I understand,
we
I
can ask for
understand your
both. There's no
thinking.
problem with that.
I
But my
understand
thought
your
was,
thinking.
that was my thought is, well, and some of these streets are, this southeast side thing is kind of an all or nothing deal. You're not going to do one big street and
Correct.
leave the 3 cross streets. You
Right.
just, maybe this year, we'll come back next month and decide that we want to approve this one because it was a prior commitment from a prior committee that got put off. And that even had public hearings and everything completed, I think, didn't it? Weren't the public hearings done?
No.
No, they were not.
No.
Okay.
So, so that's, I guess, another thing so this committee knows that, so there are assessments on these streets. Right now, it's $42 per foot. So if you have a 100-foot lot, which is big, but it's just even numbers, I guess, it's gonna cost you $4,200 just when a street is done. Plus, there's a $500 lateral fee. If you have a lateral, so they're up to 40, plus the driveways can be up to $2,000. So some of these people, you can get an average assessment, $3,000 to $4,000 when a street is reconstructed. So we are required to have public hearings on these. So when this gets approved here, there's a lot of work on our end. Like I say, we probably have 400 hours right now into Eau Claire Boulevard from one end to the other surveying. We have it drawn up, but that's not going to go to waste because someday Eau Claire Boulevard will get done. It's just put on the shelf for now. But if we do pick another street, you know, we'll have to divert our forces and survey it and design it this winter.
Right.
We turn around projects very quickly. I mean, we get budgets approved a lot of times in November, but we have to have that stuff done before November because obviously the snow flies, and then we design it in the winter, build it in the spring. So we turn stuff around very quickly. Can't quite remember where I was going with that. But, public hearings, yes. So when this gets approved through the budget process, then, you know, we have the public hearings by the Board of Public Works, and then it, you know, it comes back to this committee to approve it based upon the comments at the public hearing. So it's a whole process we go through. I mean, when we decide on to construct streets or not, we send notices out to the residents on the street, hey, this is the streets that we're thinking about for next year, just to warn them that, or to get them, not warn them, but give them a heads up, hey, we're looking at your street for reconstruction, there's a possibility of assessments. And then, so when they get the public hearing notices, if we do go through with their street, when they get their public hearing notices in January, they're not totally surprised. They had already been notified of it. So that's why we can't wait too long on this to make this decision, not only for the budget, but for the engineering that goes into it and for the notification to the residents.
Go
I
ahead.
have a question. What is the charge for overlay? I mean, is
There-
that the same $42 per
No,
foot?
we do not assess for overlays.
Okay, thank you.
That's why the neighborhoods love them.
Yes, that's why you don't get any complaints.
Alan, I had a question
Go ahead,
too.
sure.
Back, I don't know, this is when Brad was still around, as director, they did, I guess, the sewer relining on my street, like in dead of winter, and it was like 25 below on North 7th Avenue. So I would think you have a number of streets now that had that sewer issue in like North 7th Avenue, but I think it's still the original water pipe and that, but having done the sewer portion, when you go in then and really redo the rest of the utilities and the road, isn't there going to still be some cost savings because the sewer pipe is relined anyway, so you may not have to go down as far as trench-wise? I don't know.
There's a cost savings to the sewer utility. Because the
Okay.
sewer utility, when you replace the sewer line, you pay typically per foot of sewer, and the sewer department pays 100% of that cost.
So when you reconstruct the rest of the street, it's still pretty much about the same, though? Mm-hmm. Okay. I
Pretty
just
much.
thought maybe there was a savings of a 25% then when you do the rest of the road construction and the water upgrading.
No, but there are a lot of streets that do have the sewer lined, because the sewer department couldn't wait for a reconstruction. They had collapsing lines. So you're right, I think they're doing maybe $700,000-800,000 this year again.
Go ahead, Lou.
I have a question. If we were to move to accept this 5-year plan tonight, I mean, is there, being new to this, is there always room for modification?
Well, I think, you know, we're trying to nail down the 21. To be honest with you, the 22, 23, 24, that can shift all over the place. I have, you know, and some of that gets driven by development too and what goes on. I mean, I know there's streets that probably are going to move up this list based upon developments and needs. So,
So you'd only want us to act on one year at a time anyway?
well, I mean, it gives people an idea of what's coming, but the more accurate you can get this, the better. Now, I mean, you did point out, Lisa, that there was kind of a concentrated effort down on the southeast side. I've been with the city for 20 years, and the first 18, or not, I can't say that, the first 16 years here, we didn't do a street on the southeast side. Kind of stayed out of that neighborhood, or so it's good. But then all of a sudden, it just, you know, we saw, oh my goodness, it's not good. So we did Kent, and now we're doing, so there was kind of an effort maybe to do a street per year, was kind of the thought here, to get that area back up to a nice, but you're right, you spend that kind of money down there, and the rest of them, you know, we did quite a few streets up on the East Hill over here. Back when we did CDGB money, the Cleveland Avenue area just got all those, majority of those streets are new down in that area.
We did a lot near Colby and Colby too, I think, didn't we? And
Yeah,
that's
down
all
in
those
that area.
avenues.
So, I mean, there's been efforts to concentrate in areas, you know, and so I know one street that's been on here since I got here is 4th Avenue from Bridge to Knox. That was on the reconstruction list when I got here. It's 20 years later, it's still on it.
Yep, and there, you know, and every year it's worse. So Maybe, I guess we have to decide, do you guys want to commit to these southeast side streets for 2021, or do you still want that extra month? And if we hold off tonight, we should commit ourselves to giving them a final vote then at least in July so that they can move on with something. Do you still want that month, or do you want to decide tonight?
I really think we need to, I think we're
Digest.
trying to be transparent about it's the southeast side. I mean, I'm not trying to hide that per se, but I do think because of the neighborhood meetings not being held, and we want to be transparent to our neighbors and see, is there some others that should be put up near the top of the list?
Okay. All right, well, let's take this 1 month then. Let's hold action on this tonight. We will bring this back for the July meeting, but we'll commit that we will make a decision at the next meeting so that they can move forward, because that public hearing process has a set of timed steps that, like for posting and advertising and all the stuff that has to happen. So are you guys good with that if we decide this the second Thursday of July? That
Yeah.
wouldn't be too much of a delay?
I'm looking to the brains behind the operation,
Lori's
Lori.
good with it? Okay. All right.
She's
so
with all the
let's-
notices and
Yep.
the timing of everything, so she keeps us on track
So we'll
with the
bring this one
timing.
back next month, and that'll give us some time to mentally process this list and think about it a little bit, and we'll be out and about engaging with our neighbors anyway. I mean, and the neighborhood groups aren't meeting, but, you always run into somebody that wants to talk about something. So then next month, we'll know a little more.
Okay,
And
thanks.
maybe by then, Mark Hanson will know on the milling machine stuff too, and we'll have some better numbers for that, so. All right, with that then, I will take a motion to adjourn, because that's our last item. Motion by Ryan, is there a second? Second by Neil. Members in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye, opposed? None are opposed? We're good, we'll stand adjourned. Thanks, everybody.